Right, there we go. All right. A little bit about us. You do not have to have a membership. If anybody is interested, they're more than welcome to come to any of our meetings. They can email the board, which I'll put up there in a second, for more information or to get involved. We're more than happy to have participants and volunteers. There's some of our social at the bottom. Follow us. It's also when you can find out when there are more meetings and more talks going on and the topics that are coming up. Thank you very much to our sponsor for this year, which is Storm Dog Design. If you have any needs, go ahead and reach out to Stephen, wonderful gentleman, a strategic UX design in both hardware and software. And he is welcome and willing to help you out. So here's the email addresses and ways of contacting us if you would like to get involved. Again, more than happy. We are a volunteer organization. So if you'd like to get involved, let us know. Now, on to tonight. We have Robert, and I'm gonna Meyer?
It's actually pronounced Meir. Spelled Meyer,
Okay.
pronounced Meir. Yep.
So my last name is Mayu, so I get this. It's messing me up there. But Rob is the Senior Director of Strategic UX Content at ADP, responsible for strategy, development, and delivery of in-product content. You just hinted that you are stepping a bit down from that to be an individual contributor. Most recently, you've been focused on optimizing help content using generative AI systems, which again is pretty cutting edge for the time that it's been around. A little bit of background, bachelor's in computer information science and a master of professional and technical communication. And both of those are both of them from NJIT or just your master's?
Yes, actually both.
Both, okay. And then you went on for machine learning at Cornell University for a certificate.
Yep.
And you're a certified usability analyst, which is kind of interesting. And I have not heard that certification before. So his LinkedIn is up there. Feel free to follow him on that. And we'll have question and answers period at the end of this presentation. But if you have any in the middle of it, please feel free to put them in the chat. If we have a moment, we will stop and answer them, or we'll answer them right at the end of the presentation. So thank you all very much for coming. I will now let Rob take over sharing.
All righty. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We are good.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for having me today. This is a really cool experience for me. I've never I've presented a virtual conference for UXPA before, so this is a first. I'm very excited about it. And yeah, basically what I've been working on is taking existing content, mostly help content that we serve up in our products to context sensitive help to assist our users, and making that content work for all these new generative AI models that my company ADP has been working on. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is I'm going to do a little terminology lesson. It's not too scary. Talk about the scenario, and this is actually a fictionalized scenario based on real world. ADP is pretty funny about using actual names and processes. So the process that we follow, everything we've done is factual. It's just I created a fake company to illustrate it. We're going to talk about why we love the help content that we create. Talk about the approach we went through, talk about some common misconceptions and challenges that we faced, and some of them are kind of funny, and some of them were like just real head scratchers. The human validation process, I'll talk a bit about that, which was really key to this the process that we worked on, and then talk about some of the lessons we learned and some of the things we're looking at for the future. So we already talked about me. That's me. And I'll start with the terminology lesson. But before I do, one of the things, when I presented that, I've done similar presentations a couple times this year. Actually, just recently, I was at the Voice and AI conference in Washington D.C. at the end of October, and there's a lot of excitement and also a lot of trepidation around generative AI. And, you know, there are some people who look at generative AI as like, C3PO from Star Wars, this helpful assistant that really just wants to please you and do what you want and that sort of thing. And then there's the other kind of vision of AI as the Terminator that's bent on destroying humankind. So if you're in either of those camps, you'll be okay with this presentation because this isn't a raging success story. It's really very gritty, and I'm going to talk about the things that just have not worked. But it's not an abject failure either. So there's a little bit for everybody. So if you're a C3PO fan or a Terminator fan, you'll find something in here, I think, that that'll kind of resonate with you. So I'm going to start with just some 5 terms that we use here and that you're going to be seeing. So I just want to make sure everyone's aware of it, specifically what they are in terms of how I'm going to be talking about them in this presentation. So first, generative AI, right? This is the ChatGPT, showed up November 2022, and everybody was like, oh my God, look what this thing can do. So it really is just a form of artificial intelligence, and it can produce content in a variety of media, right? Words, pictures, video, audio. You'll see, DALL-E can produce pictures, and most of the time the people have 6 fingers or whatever. So there's room to grow, but that's basically what it is. It's a form of artificial intelligence that can create content. And the responses, what it provides you, is based on data on which it's been trained, right? And that's key to all of this. So I did hear a developer once refer to generative AI as predictive text on steroids. So, if you're using your phone and you're typing and it's suggesting the next word, well, that's basically what generative AI does. It has this enormous corpus of content. And based on all of that content, it predicts what the next word or the next sentence or the next paragraph will be. And that's basically how it creates the content that it creates. So vectors, if you're like me, when I finished trigonometry in high school, I swore that I would never use this again. I would never see it again. I didn't know why I had to know what vectors were. I didn't know why I had to know what sine and cosine and tangent were. And I very quickly forgot it until last year. and suddenly vectors came back into my life. And if you're like me and you're not a big fan of math, I'll just be very quick about this, but it's important to know. So a vector is really just a line, right? But it's a line with 2 very specific attributes. It's a line that has length, and it's a line that has direction. And that's important because what ends up happening with the text that we use in AI, the majority of the time, that text is what we call vectorized. So basically, that word, that sentence, that piece of text is converted into a vector. It's converted into basically a numeric value that has a length and a direction. And the reason why we do this is because when we're trying to measure similarity, when we're trying to determine if this piece of text is similar to this other piece of text, we use vectors to do that. And there are several ways to do that, but one of the most common ways, and the way we do it at ADP, is we measure the cosine of the angle between the 2 vectors. So if we look at this diagram here, we have with this blue vector here, and we have a red vector here, and then this little purple line here is the angle. And then by measuring the cosine of the angle, we can determine how similar they are. So if the angle is 90 degrees, right? So it's like this. Well, the cosine is 0, which means that that text isn't even close to being similar, right? It's this far apart. However, if the angle is 0, the cosine is 1, and that means that they're right on top of each other. They're virtually identical. So what we do is when we're measuring those vectors to determine whether or not one piece of content is similar to another piece, we have a threshold that we just used at ADP that says that if the cosine is 0.92 or greater, that's a match. We're saying that that content is close enough that it's similar, right? And that we can use it. We can find that match. And I'll explain why we match and all that in a little bit. But that's just, that's vectors. Very exciting stuff. Natural language processing. It's a machine learning technology that uses AIs to essentially comprehend, right? So AIs don't really think, but we use comprehend because that's a term that people understand. So they comprehend, generate, and manipulate human language. And natural language processing, or NLP, is the technology that AIs use to be able to do that, to be able to understand, theoretically understand what content is. Large language models, or LLMs, that's just the huge repository. So ChatGPT was the large language model for ChatGPT was trained on literally billions of pieces of content, right? And that's basically the corpus that it uses to create the answers when you prompt it for a question. And the LLM is basically how the AI comes up with the answer. That's how it, quote unquote, understands what it is that you're asking and finds the content and returns it to you. And then finally, this is one that probably a lot of people have not heard about. It's called RAG. It's retrieval augmented generation. And what it is, it's a way to kind of guide the large language model to get the answer you're looking for. And the way it works is, so when you're chatting with ChatGPT, right? So you type something in, you say, create a job description for this position, and these are the attributes of it, right? So that's called a prompt. What happens with when you just give it a prompt without any additional information, it's going to rely on the large language model to come up with that answer, right? What RAG does is we say, okay, we're going to have a prompt. How do you do such and such? But we're going to give it a document that contains the answer. So what that does is it enhances the prompt. So the LLM isn't starting from scratch. The AI is not starting from, okay, we have this huge large language model. I have to go in and kind of find this information. What we're doing is we're saying, here's the prompt. How do I do this? And here's a document that contains the answer. We feed both of those into the large language model. And then we just basically use the large language model to come up with a summarized way of saying it, right? So it takes the document we give it, kind of summarizes or comes up with some concise steps, and then just uses a large language model for the language part of it. And the good thing about that is it improves the answer accuracy, and it also helps reduce hallucinations, because we're not just saying, go out to the whole LLM and find this information. So retrieval augmented generation is a huge part of the success we've had with this product, because we've been able to feed it a document that has the answer. So here's a scenario. Beans and Leaves is a coffee and tea retailer. Think of it as a poor man's Starbucks. The customers, we call them bean leavers. They use chat for support. And in this scenario, you manage the content development team, right? So you're sitting on a ton of help content. And by a ton, I mean literally thousands of help articles that explain how to do things, that provide conceptual information, that provide troubleshooting steps, things like that. So it's documentation that you've created over the course of several years, right? And this documentation is all sitting there being used for a specific purpose. It's being used to within the applications that that B&L serves or maintains. And it's context sensitive, it's searchable, it's all that stuff. So this content is very mature, very robust. And now we're looking at introducing an AI, and how do we feed it? How do we give it the information that we need in this RAG search, right? And that's when they come to us, the content team, and they say, okay, well, hey, can your content be leveraged for AI? Is that something we can do? Well, yeah, it is actually. Um, so in this particular scenario, we wanted it was a heavy lift, right? What we wanted the AI to do was actually three things. So the first thing we wanted it to do was to review the chat transcript in real time, right? So as the agent was typing back and forth with the customer, the AI was reviewing this chat transcript and looking to identify what the problem was. What is it that the user's chatting about? Once it identifies that problem, it creates a problem statement. And then we want the AI to go find the help article that answers that question, right? So now we have a prompt. We want to have it find the article. And then it takes those two things, marries them together as a RAG prompt, and it feeds it into the AI to generate a response. So that's a lot to ask the AI to do, right? So it's three different distinct processes. But that's what we decided we were going to try and have it do. So we love help content. And why do we love it? Well, our content is really, in a lot of ways, very much ahead of a lot of the content that ends up going into AIs. A lot of times there'll be large articles, or there'll be PDF files or whatever, these very, very voluminous documents. Our content is in an architecture called DITA, which which stands for the Darwin Information Typing Architecture. It's XML based, it's format neutral, it's extensible, and the only tagging in there is semantic tagging. So we don't talk anything about font sizes or colors or anything like that. It's all semantic. So that makes it a lot more digestible for the AI. The content is client facing that we produce. And when we're talking about a chat situation, right, where the agent is chatting with the client, we want to be client facing. We don't want to have internal content that then has to be converted into a client facing answer. Our content is chunked into a single task or a single concept. So if you look at this little example here on the side, I'm a bean lever is the card. Their marketing team's awful. So it's activating your I'm a bean lever card, and it's it's the steps on how to do that. So it's 5 steps, a little bit note at the end, and boom, you're done, right? So the content is very small, very consumable, and it's a single task or a single concept. And that's important because that makes it a lot easier for the AI to consume. If we're passing this little piece of content in to answer a question of how do I activate my card, it's going to have a much easier time getting the answer than if we passed it an article that talked about how to activate the card, how to deactivate your card, how to add dollars to your card, and that sort of thing. So having it chunked in these small pieces like this was a huge win for us. The tone is conversational, which is great because the chat is a conversation. We have metadata that we've embedded in the content to provide more context around what this piece of content is used for. And the other beautiful thing about our authoring in DITA is that we can add additional metadata if we need to. So as we're going through, we actually had this happen where we realized that, hey, if we added another piece of metadata to this particular topic, it would make it easier for the AI to have context around what it's used for. So, we actually ended up doing that in a couple different cases, creating metadata specifically for AI use, and it had nothing to do with the other means of delivery that we use this for, like help and search. And then finally, we have tons of it, right? Thousands and thousands and thousands of articles. So, so for all these reasons, our content was really off to a really good start in terms of your optimization for AI. So another quick terminology lesson. This is just not terminology like vectors and things, but just to kind of set the stage for how the process worked. So a transcript is just a conversation between the client and agent. A turn is one back and forth. So a client asks a question, an agent provides an answer, right? So that's called a turn. So that's just one part of the transcript. The problem statement is the AI's interpretation of the issue. So as I said, the AI is watching this conversation transpire, and it's looking to identify a problem. And when it finds what it thinks the problem is, it creates what is called a problem statement from that. A brief is something pretty unique, I think, to what we did here. I haven't heard in my travels with AI other groups doing briefs. And what a brief is essentially is it's a question that we've created with the help of AIs, actually, based on historical reviews of other transcripts. So a brief is basically another form of a problem statement, but it's already been created and it's already been assigned to a help article. And that's important. You'll see that in a minute about why we did that. A search query is a vector search where we match the problem statements to the brief. So again, as I mentioned earlier, that cosine of an angle, if the problem statement and the search query, if we get a 0.92 or better match, we say we have an answer, we have a match between the problem statement and the query and the brief. And then the article is just the help article. So again, transcript, turn, problem statement, brief, search query, and article. So we had two decisions that we had to make when we first started this process. And the first decision was we had to decide whether we were going to use the internal content that was written for support, or we're going to use the help content written for customers. And then the second decision was, do we try to match problem statements directly to the article, or do we match problem statements to briefs, and then those briefs are tied to articles? So as I said, the reason we decided to go with the client content written for the customers was because it was already written for the customers. So it was less work for the AI to have to come up with an answer and then have to convert like an internal document to a client friendly answer. The other thing was matching problem statements to briefs to articles. That turned out to be a much more efficient process because, along with everything else you're trying to do, getting the right answer, you also have to worry about performance, right? So if it's taking 10 seconds to come back with an answer, that's not going to work when you're live chatting with a client. So we wanted to have something that came back very quickly. So by using help content, which is what we ended up doing, written for customers, we're already halfway there, right? Because rather than having to convert internal content, internal written content to client-facing content, we're already starting with client content. So that was one performance advantage we had. The other one, by matching problem statements to briefs, we're matching a question to a question as opposed to a question to an article. And by doing question to question and having that brief directly assigned to an article, all we had to do was match the problem statement to the brief. And then we automatically knew where the article was because the brief had a direct connection to the article. So that improved the performance pretty dramatically because we were able to, in a couple of nanoseconds, match a problem statement to a brief, as opposed to trying to match the problem statement to an entire article and pull out the relevant part. So here's the process flow. It might be a little small. I apologize in advance for this. Usually this is on a big screen, but I can send the presentation out after this so you can all take a closer look at it. But here's the process in a nutshell, right? Here's the client support chat going on here. This is the transcript, and you can see this little area in red. This is where the AI identifies what it believes to be the problem. And what it says in here is I need to activate my loyalty card. And it might say it somewhat differently, but the AI then creates a problem statement. And the problem statement is I need to activate my loyalty card. That's what this person is chatting about. That's what they want to do. So what we do is we feed that problem statement into a vector search. And the vector search is looking for a match between the problem statement and the brief. And again, coming back to that, cosine, similarity. And what it does is it goes through and it looks at the briefs and it looks at the problem statement and it tries to find the closest match, the one that's 0.92 or greater. And just so happens that we have a brief that's in the system called How Do I Activate My Bean Lever Card? Perfect. We have a problem statement, we have a brief, we have a match. And because this brief is directly tied to this article, Activate Your Bean Lever Card, we don't have to go any further looking for articles. We know that this brief, this article answers this brief. So what we do, this is where RAG comes in. We take this brief, which is part of the prompt. We take this article and we feed this augmented prompt, the question and the answer, into the LLM. And then the AI then spits out an answer. And the answer is, sure, I can help you with that. First in your app, da 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 da. And the agent looks at the answer and they give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So if this answer actually does answer the question the way the agent would answer it, they can just click a button and respond back to the client with this exact answer that came out from the AI. If they decide, you know what, I'm not entirely thrilled with this, I'm going to edit it a little bit, they can give us a thumbs down. All of this information gets fed into our system. So we get this feedback. We know that if they gave it a thumbs down, we can go in and look and see what the answer was that the AI generated. We can also see the answer that the agent responded with. And then we can figure out, what went wrong or, where we might have missed the mark. Also, if the answer is completely wrong, which happens, of course, and the agent is, they spent a couple of seconds on the AI providing an answer. We don't lose a whole ton of time. The agent can still go in and type an answer from scratch and just disregard the AI. But again, so we're seeing these. We have three different places where the AI comes in, right? We have the AI generated problem statement. We have the brief that was AI generated. We have the prompt and the response. So this is the whole process from start to finish. So some common misconceptions. Well, the biggest one is generative AI is magic. Right? when we started on this process, when I got involved in it in August of 23, we thought this is going to be great, right? This content, I mean, what could be better? We have content written for, in a way that an agent would conceivably answer a question. It's written directly for the client. It's very, very compact and very concise. There's no way this is going to fail, right? What we didn't account for is the fact that if I jump back here, any one of these spots is a potential point of failure, right? So it's possible that the AI is going to get the problem statement wrong, that it's going to see the wrong thing and not actually understand what the problem truly is. If that happens, even if we do get a matching brief, we're still going to answer the question incorrectly because the question wasn't right. When we get into the vector search, it is possible that even if the problem statement's right, it's going to match to the wrong brief. And if that happens again, we're not going to get the answer right. Even if all of this goes fine, right? We have the right problem, we have the right brief, we have the right article, and we feed that all into the LLM, we've all heard about AIs hallucinating. So even if we're basically saying, here's the answer, use this to generate it, it can still come up with some really funky results. For example, we had one situation where we had a 5-step process like this, and the AI decided to add a 6th step. We don't know where it came from. It was wrong, but it added it. It just put it in and thought, yeah, well, this looks good. So even if everything else is right, the AI can still come up with the wrong answer or come up with part of the answer that's wrong. So yeah, these are the misconceptions that, the AI's magic. The answer is always going to be found. When it is found, it's going to be accurate. And the other thing was that we didn't think our content was going to need to change. We thought this is perfect. This is and even the data scientists were telling us when we first started that I had one data scientist tell me, he's like, I'm just blown away by the way this content is structured. He goes, I've worked at a bunch of different places, and a lot of times this stuff's in Word documents and it's PDF, and it's completely unstructured. He goes, the way this is set up, this is going to be great. This is going to be perfect. So we didn't think anything would have to change, and we were wrong. We did have to make changes, and we're still making changes as we go through. So some of the challenges we faced, nuance and ambiguity seem kind of polar opposites, but it is, they both did happen. So the nuance, when we create help content, and if you've ever worked in a product where you have online help and you have a very robust search engine, you don't write content for every possible situation. Usually you don't have the resources to do it anyway, but even if you did, you don't want to write so much content that when people are searching for something, they get a bunch of search noise, right? So we kind of follow, roughly an 80-20 rule. The 80% of the most common things that people ask about, that's what we create the help for. The 20% is so nuanced or so specific that most people probably don't need it. And if it's there, it's going to get called up in search. So instead of having 10 results, you're going to have 50, right? If you add all this content in. So we deliberately, when creating content for use in online help, we deliberately leave out a lot of that nuanced stuff. Unfortunately, with chat, that nuanced stuff is a lot of times exactly what it is that the users are asking for, right? And so then we had a situation where like, oh, geez, we don't have this content. Now we have to create it. So that's when we started creating content specifically for the AI to be able to answer these questions. But then we had to create a way to suppress that content from going into the application and being served up in search. So we had some situations like that. We also had ambiguity. We would have people saying, how do I do this thing? That was a huge challenge. The people, when they're chatting and when they know that they're chatting with a human, and they were, they can kind of make an assumption that the person, the agent they're chatting with, is going to understand what they're saying. So they don't use perfect grammar, right? When you're chatting, who does? And they can be a little vague sometimes and a little ambiguous. And the AI had a very difficult time with that, right? It's looking to find a problem, identify a problem. And when there is ambiguity in the language that the person's using when they're chatting, it makes it very hard for the AI to understand what the problem actually is. Another big one were multi-intent questions, and these are two examples here. When someone's chatting, they don't often say, I have two questions. Question number one, how can I change my pickup location? And let the agent ask, question number two, why can't I enter a discount code? No, they put that all in and figure the agent will just answer them in order. So how can I change my pickup location, and why can't I enter a discount code? Or why can't I complete my order, and is there a way to get premium service without paying a fee? Two completely disparate questions. There's no way that we're going to have an article that answers both of those, and we're not even going to have a brief that asks both those questions at the same time. So that was something else we had to kind of pick apart, work with the AI, with the prompt generation and with prompt engineers to say, okay, if it sees a situation like this, how can we break those two things out into two different prompts so that we can answer one question first and answer the other one second? So, and this is a balancing act, right? We want to create content We want to leverage as much content as we can from our existing systems, but we also have to be aware of the fact that we're going to need content that's specific to the AI that we don't want to introduce back into our help ecosystem where it can cause all kinds of problems. So we had a real balancing act of understanding, okay, do these questions that are being asked in these chats, are they coming up enough times that that we need to address them, or is it just, okay, in the past 3 years, one person has asked this question? Well, there's no point creating a help article for that. We can just let the agent answer that question. And also understanding when we say, okay, hey, here's something, this question gets asked a lot, and we actually don't have a help topic for this. Maybe this is a miss, right? This is a knowledge gap. Not only do we want to answer this question for the AI, but we also want to add this topic into our help system because somehow or another we missed it. So there's that balancing act that we have to do between all the different purposes of this content where it's being used. And then the other one, this is just kind of a funny thing. We a lot of times in our help content, we'll say, if you need additional information, contact support. Well, we had to suppress that from coming out because in the generative AI answer, because that's what they're doing, right? So we can't have an agent saying, if you have more information, contact support, because that would sound ridiculous. So, those are some of the challenges we faced. There were several others, but these were things that really kind of stuck out to me as we started going down this path because we thought everything was so perfect, right? We thought this content was, what could be better? Well, when you're using it for a purpose it wasn't originally intended for, these are some of the things that immediately popped out.
Rob, we do have a question, if you wouldn't mind
Sure.
answering. Briefly explain the difference between brief and article again.
Okay, so a brief, here, let me jump back. So a brief is a question, right? So, and a brief is very similar to a problem statement. It's just a question, and it's a question that we've generated and validated and determined that it's a valid question, right? And these briefs are generated, and I'll go through this in a little bit, but the briefs are actually created by an AI off to the side. So we've done this previously, and we did it by reviewing historical transcripts of chats for the past, I think at this point we're at 2 years now, where we've gone through and we've looked for the types of questions that users have asked in these chats, and we created these briefs. And all the brief is a question. A help article is like this help window here, where it's the answer to the question, right? So if the brief is, how do I activate my Bean Lever card, the help article is activating your Bean Lever card, tap settings, tap on the Bean Lever, boom, 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 steps 1 through 5. So that's the difference between the brief and the article. The brief is a question. The article is essentially the answer to that question. Does that make sense? Does it not make sense?
Yes,
it does.
we got to thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sure. Okay, so the things we knew, right? We knew we had tons of briefs, right? We literally had thousands of briefs. We had tons of content, literally thousands of pieces of content. And what we realized is that at this point, the AI has done a lot of the lifting, right? The AI originally created these briefs. And we have this content that we've created for another purpose. And now we have to make sure that everything is right. And we realized that we needed human validation. This was not something that we could spot check. It wasn't something that we could just rely on the feedback we got from the agents. We needed to take some proactive measures to make sure that the briefs and the content were correct. So we went down a human validation path, and this involved several people in the US. We also worked with several agents. We had about 50 agents based in the Philippines that were also involved in this process. And the process had 2 paths to it. So what we did is, as I said, so these briefs were created by the AI examined these historical transcripts. It created these briefs, these questions based on the transcripts. So now what we had to do is validate whether or not that brief was good, right? Was a legitimate question in a way that a client might ask it. And that was a little tricky, right? Because the question could be something it could sound very formal or something. Like a client wouldn't ask the question that way. Trying to think of an example, like how would I activate my I'm a Bean Lever registered trademark card from Beans and Leaves registered trademark? Like it. Some of these questions ended up being very formal because, again, an AI is generating them. So some of those things we ended up stripping out. Some of the questions just were wacky, like they didn't make any sense because, again, an AI hallucinated. But so we have these briefs, and we went through an initial validation with developers that were just kind of looking at the briefs and saying, yeah, this looks right. We'll let the real agents look at it, but it looks right to me. And we also had the AI take a crack at assigning that brief to an article. So the first part of the process up here, so we have these briefs that passed the initial validation, that the developers gave it a thumbs up. And we had our validators, our human validators, look at the brief and look at the article that the brief was assigned to. And they had to make a determination that, yes, this article answers this brief, or this brief is answered in this article. If the answer was yes, perfect. That's the sunny day scenario. So if the answer is yes, then we're good. We have a positive match between a brief and an article, and the process is complete. If, however, the brief is not answered by the article, it has to fall down into another pipeline. And down here is really where it really gets fun. So what happens here is we have this bucket of briefs, and these are briefs that the developers in their initial review said, nope, this is not this brief isn't right. It's not matching this article. We have a problem here. So we start off already with a queue of briefs that failed validation. We're now adding additional briefs to it. And this process is a lot more involved. What we're doing here is we're saying this brief is not matched to the article that it's assigned to, or the brief doesn't sound right, or there's some kind of problem. So, so the first thing we did was we say, okay, the brief doesn't match the article. It isn't a good match to the article. Is there an article out there in our system of help that does answer that question, that does answer that brief? If there is, well, then we just had a misassignment, right? The AI just got it wrong. It's a good brief, it's a good question, but it's just not assigned to the right article. So what we do, the human validator, they say, okay, it should be this article instead. So we reassign it. The article's already there. We just have to change the embedding, and the process is complete. So that's not so bad. However, if there is not an article that answers that brief, then we have to make another decision. Can we create content? And can we create content? Comes in a couple different forms. If it's yes, we create the content either by creating a whole new help article because we had a complete knowledge gap, we had a complete miss and don't have anything for this, or we have an article that's close and we just need to add a sentence or a paragraph. So one way or another, we're creating content. Either it's a net new article or it's in addition to an existing article. Regardless of what happens, that new content has to go through legal review to make sure it's okay and that we're not saying anything wrong. And then that article, that revised article or that new article is reassigned to the brief and the process is complete. We did have some situations where we can't create content. And it could be a situation like I talked about earlier, where it's really very nuanced, where we couldn't really answer this question because it's so specific and so complicated. It could be something where someone's asking for legal advice, which we do not provide, or they could be asking for financial advice. There's a whole bunch of different situations where content cannot solve this problem. So what we do there is, rather than calling them fallbacks, we call them fall forwards, because we provided some canned responses to answer those types of things. So if someone was asking for legal advice, sorry, we can't provide that information. We suggest you talk to your attorney, or if it's financial advice, talk to your accountant, that sort of thing. And then so then we have a no, we have the fall forward message, and the process is complete here. So where the bulk of the work came in was this creating the content and reassigning. That's where a large amount of the work came, and that's where we relied heavily on the human validators, because that was a huge lift. And we were looking at literally, I think over the course of 6 months, somewhere in the area of 6,000 briefs, and matching those up to a couple thousand help articles. And sometimes it was one to many or many to one, because we could have a brief. We got 5 different briefs that were tied to the same article, because they all were asking questions, a similar question, but slightly differently. And so we could have multiple briefs assigned to an article. And we did have some articles that were, multiple articles assigned to briefs and that sort of thing. But it was a very intense process, and it took a long time to do, but it was absolutely necessary, because without having the human expertise in the loop, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere, because it was just, when it was just left to the AI to do everything, it just was never going to get where we needed it to be. So human validation was absolutely crucial to this. So how'd it go? We got some really good responses. We saw a major improvement over the content we were using originally when we first were attempting this. As each release came out, we were getting leaps and bounds better. It still wasn't perfect. We still had a lot of misses. We still had a lot of answers that were kind of right, but not really. So there was a lot of room for improvement, and we're still improving as we're going. It's every little tweak we do kind of moves the needle a little bit, but it's hard. It's really hard. I think the biggest thing I learned from this is it's not as easy as it seems. Everybody talks about how AI is going to revolutionize things, and I believe it will. But the idea that it's here ready right now and it can do this, it's a lot of work. So lessons learned. We had to deal with competing philosophies. We had to deal with the 80-20 rule versus the 80 for the help and 20 for AI. So those philosophies we had to deal with, and it required additional resources, which we didn't always have, because we have people fully staffed on writing help, and now we're creating additional content that we're using just for the AI. We needed to check all of the content, right? We needed to check everything that we were doing, and making sure that the content was optimized. So if we needed additional metadata, we needed to add that. If we needed to tweak the content in a way that that gave us a better answer for the AI, we had to figure out how to do that without impacting the help answer. The other thing we learned is do not go right to the user. This would have been disastrous and would have been a huge reputation hit if we had decided that we were going to let the AI just respond directly to the user without an agent involved. We knew that human annotation, this human validation process, was absolutely critical, and that we could not have gone anywhere without this. And that was something when we first started going down this road. The first couple of releases, we didn't have humans human validation on this stuff, and it was just miserable. So when we started adding people into the mix and having the agents, having these subject matter experts who answer these questions for a living get involved, we had a much better response. And the other thing was experimenting with the content. We actually created a mini application. I actually had it was like one of those things at 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up and you're like, boy, I wonder if we could do this. And I went and I asked a developer, can you create just this tiny little app where I can give it a prompt, a brief, and paste in the answer and the help article content, and hit a button and see what the AI comes back with. And I thought this was like, this is going to be weeks or months to build. And I talked to the developer and she's like, yeah, is Tuesday okay? Yeah, okay. So if they put this together very quickly, it's a really bare bones tool, but it was great because we were able to experiment with the content so that if we added a sentence or we changed a sentence or we move things around a little bit, we could test how the AI was going to react to that article change. And we saw some really interesting results, especially when we're talking about things that can be vice versa. So if if you have it written one way, but the alternate is also correct, just adding a sentence to say, conversely, if you want to do this, follow the same process. And without that sentence, the AI wasn't able to answer the question. With that sentence, it could. So those types of experimentation were really eye-opening for one, but also really pretty valuable because we were able to make some tweaks to content to get answers from an article that we weren't getting answers from before. So that was pretty cool. So looking to the future, we're getting to the end here. So we realized that we need to create AI specific content. We've started to do that. We started to create scenario-based content that is only being served up for the AI. It's not going into our help ecosystem, and we're publishing it to a separate location because we realize some of that 20% stuff really is vital, really needs to be there for the AI, but we really don't want to have it in the help. We've been continuing to embed specific GenAI specific metadata that the AI is consuming to help have context and understand how to answer the question better. We made a change since when I presented this over the summer. We're now delivering the content in a format Markdown, if you're familiar with Markdown. That's something that they did some testing, the developers were testing, and they found that Markdown performed better. So because our content's in DITA, we were able to build a quick transform that took the content from DITA to Markdown, and we're seeing much better results that way. Ultimately, I think where we're going to go is we're actually not going to convert it into anything. We're not going to convert it into Markdown. We're not going to convert it to HTML. We're going to deliver the source DITA content to the AI and implement some newer technologies that go beyond RAG, things like ontologies and knowledge graphs, which are becoming much more popular now. That's going to be long-term, though. That's a much bigger lift than just changing a delivery format. So that's it. It's kind of a, like I said, it's a mixed bag, right? It wasn't a raging success. It wasn't a complete failure. It was, wouldn't say somewhere in the middle. It's a little more success than failure, but it's challenging. And I think that it was something that you might not think about when you start heading down one of these roads, introducing AIs and trying to bring in existing content. It seems like, like I said, the misconception was that it was, if you have the content, it's going to work. You're going to get the answer. And we found that wasn't always the case. So we have, oh, wow, it's 5 to 8. Wow, look at that. Just in time. So any questions about anything I covered? I'm happy to answer.
I have one question for you to kick things off for this.
Mm-hmm.
So when you started this process, the company was also already seemed set and open to bringing AI in. Have you experienced this where there is no kind of basis set yet, or like this is a brand new concept, we're gonna try it? Any thoughts or feelings on that?
Yeah, it was a brand new concept, and because I'll jump out of my beans and leaves thing and go back to ADP. ADP is a technology company, so there was a huge interest in bringing AI in to our products and into our services, to the point where we needed to tell people to slow down because what was happening is that a lot of people were jumping in, and we were like, wait a second, you can't use chat gpt, you can't put proprietary information in there. So we really had to come up with we had to create an organization, a governance organization for AI. Any group that wanted to start using AI had to be, their idea had to be vetted. So yeah, it was more of a trying to hold people back than having to find people to generate interest.
Very lucky in that circumstance. Um,
For sure, absolutely.
I do know some previous organizations were very tech frightened. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and also change is a big thing. So you've also got change management in there for people who don't, it's hard. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Yep.
Also, could you touch a little bit about the QA process on after teaching it, how you would go on and figure out how much it had actually gotten and how far off? Like, did you have a set process? Was it like typical software bugs and QA process?
Yeah. So what we did is, so we had a team of data scientists, and what they were doing is they were going and they were looking at the misses, right? So if we got a thumbs down from an agent on an article, or on a response, they would go in and they would analyze what the agent provided back as an answer versus the AI generated answer, and then they'd come to me and we try to figure out, like, there were hundreds of these, right? So we couldn't look at every single one, but they tried to do some analysis to understand like where the big misses were, and then we would go through and say, okay, well, the AI said this, the agent said this, and try to figure out how we got there, how it either was the brief wrong, was the brief tied to the wrong article again? Did we have one of those situations we missed last time? So we did have a formal process, but it was, the process itself was formal, but the way we went about trying to solve the process varied depending on the situation. The other thing we've experimented with, and we haven't done it yet, but I would not be surprised if we ultimately do this, is there a way to take the agent answer and convert that into a did it article, into an article, and feed it back out into the AI?
Yep.
Since that we know is that's a good answer, right? So
Yep.
we have a brief, we know what the question was that the user asked, we have an answer from the agent. How do we take that and commoditize that into an article and put it in?
Save you a bit of time too and some work. We do have another question that just came in on chat. And then Kevin asks, what was it like to train a call center agent or call center agents to use the AI responses and when to provide feedback on the AI?
We didn't open this up to everyone. We started with some agents that were very seasoned, that have been around for a while, that were really excellent in what they did, and that were also interested in trying this out. So that made it easier. And we also had some, it was, there were a couple of things that they really like. So in addition to this process that I was talking about, we also created these things called chit chats. And what a chit chat is basically just small talk. And that was just straight from the LLM. It didn't require any kind of technical accuracy or things like that. It was just, if someone, a client were to, join a chat and start a conversation, based on what it was that the client asked, that was just like, hi, how are you? You know, the agent, instead of having to type something out, could just grab a chit chat that said, I'm doing great. How are you today? So instead of having to type that out, they could just paste it in. They loved that. They this it's like it's not like they couldn't do small talk, but having to type all that out, and having to figure out exactly the way to respond. So we had those advantages that they really, really liked. And because they were interested and because they'd been around a long time and really knew their stuff, they dealt with the problems of, and especially in the beginning, we weren't getting anything right. It was really, before we really started getting into the human validation, more often than not, the answer was wrong and they would have to thumbs down it and either start from scratch or try to edit it.
I can only imagine how many times as a call center agent you write, "Hi, how you doing? How can I help you?" Like all of those
Right.
mundane, like they don't seem like much to us, but on your 25th time typing it, I'm sure it gets a little tiresome.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
um,
Thanks so much for answering, Rob. Just a follow-up question, if it's okay.
Mhm.
absolutely, go for it.
Had you guys considered doing it with people supporting voice calls as well?
That voice is on the roadmap. We definitely want to go there. That's going to be I think, a harder challenge, because it is voice. But that is definitely one of what we would like to be able to do this across, virtually every interaction type thing we have with users, have it as an offering. But because of the synchronous nature of voice, it really makes it difficult because you don't have that agent in the middle.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. This has been great.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it.
Just give a call out there for if there's any other final questions or anything, comments. I don't see any jumping little dots in the chat. So, Rob, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate you joining us tonight. Again, the social LinkedIn is on our social, so
Yep.
you can get a hold of him if you have further questions or just want to. Thank you. You've got a
Yeah, you
QR
can.
code right up there for us. He's prepared.
Hey,
Uh, Everybody have a great holidays coming up. And again, thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate it.
thank you. Have a great evening.